Kia ora whanau. So here we are in the beautiful little park with a friend of mine we just met, and very special friend indeed. This is a beautiful special report we have. It's going to be very educational, so listen up and yeah, what's your name, what's your story, and tell us why we're here.
Okay, my name is Keryn Johnson. I'm a scientist. I'm what you'd call a quantum biologist, and I make regenerative medicine technologies. Okay, so my story, I guess I can start with something a little bit low-key. Grew up South Island, and I guess, followed my passion and my dream to be a scientist. As a child, I would spend heaps of time out in nature. So I think it's very appropriate that we're here at a park today in Nio. And when I turned 11, I had some trauma in my life, and that really caused a bit of a U-turn for me. My mother died when I was 11.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah. So that suicide was, I found out later, due to a medical intervention. So she'd been given, I think it's called Depo-Vera, which is a injection and for birth control, and that caused some consequences which ended up in her taking her life. So for me, that caused trauma. I couldn't walk for 6 months. I had psoriatic arthritis in my hips and my knees. I spent time essentially lying on the sofa watching soap operas, dropping Disprin to try to get over the pain. And really it was the pain of loss and how that manifested in the feeling of pain within my body. So that stress. I guess that led me on a path, really, and a scientific journey, which I ended up doing a science degree at Canterbury University, so undergraduate degree looking at kind of biological processes, so plant and microbial sciences and biochemistry, and then I ended up doing a master's in molecular genetics. And then I took a year off and I taught hip-hop dancing. I spent 6 months working on a construction site, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And eventually came to the point and made a decision that I wanted to carry on with science. So I ended up coming up to Wellington and doing a PhD in biochemistry. And that was looking at isolating enzymes from sheep pancreas and seeing how they, seeing how they compared to porcine pancreatic enzymes. So learning biochemistry, learning how, I guess, science works. And then once I completed that, I ended up starting at a New Zealand Research Institute as a research scientist at Industrial Research Limited. And I developed an RNA sequencing kit using enzymes that allowed me to, I guess, make some kits that different people all around the world would use to help them sequence RNA. So I guess, with the mRNA vaccine thing, I feel that, I'm at least able to make small comments on some of the technology. That technology that I developed has been superseded, right? I did that work back in 2001. So science has kind of pushed forward and come a long way since then. So my journey after, I guess, doing that is really focused on regenerative medicine. So I have spent a lot of time trying to understand how skin wound healing works, and developed something from sheep stomach that is used in breast reconstruction surgery, hernia repair, and chronic wound healing. And so that was some intellectual property that I developed for a company based up in Auckland now that sells products internationally.
Wow.
And it's been in over 4 million people, helping heal wounds. So for me, there's been a lot of trauma recently from what the government's been doing. I've personally experienced trauma in my life as a child, and then to figure out how to get back up on my feet and learn a bit about biology and how biology works, and then develop technologies that help people and help them heal. So that's kind of really been the focus of my science for 20 odd years. And in 2010 I started working on Manuka honey. And honey's an amazing product, right? You think about it being found in the Pharaoh tombs. It's been around for millennia, and yet we still didn't really understand how it works. And the complexity of honey really comes from the perspective as soon as you add water to it, it changes. And that change that happens very quickly. And one of the things that I found back in, I guess, around about 2013 is the physics happening in honey, happening at nanosecond speeds.
Wow.
So up to 1 billion times a second, right? So all of a sudden the time frame at what things operate at changed for me, right? So how does something work at 1 billionth of a second? It's a light interactive system, right? So what happens is that light in the environment is able to be used by the honey, and what it does is it takes one atom, and one atom housed inside a hexagon ring. That atom, it gets what they call photoreduction, right? So essentially the light comes down and it puts an electron into that atom, and the atom goes from one form to another. And that light system makes it reactive. It makes it go from Fe3 to Fe2, and when it's in that state, it's able to react with hydrogen peroxide to generate something that's called a hydroxy radical, which has a half-life of a nanosecond.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, we've got a light-based system that allows you to put high-energy radicals. And then I looked into science, and everything in science says that radicals are bad for us, that antioxidants are beneficial for us. And I started questioning that, right? I started questioning, okay, well, Manuka honey is known to be good for us, and yet it does this light-based physics that's generating hydroxy radicals that last nanoseconds. How can I reconcile between the idea of an antioxidant being good, a radical being bad, Manuka honey being good, and yet it producing this radical system that's happening? So it didn't gel, right? It didn't make any sense. So I went, okay, where is this hydroxy radical being used in biology? And what I found is that it's being used in cell death, apoptosis, which is a natural process to break down cells back into CO2 and water. So there's this death system within biology that's natural, that removes old cells from our bodies to keep us young, to keep us energized and revitalized. And all of a sudden it's like, so physics happening at nanosecond speeds in our bodies and our cells is actually restoring health and well-being using physics of light. And so I was taught as a scientist that the world is external and physical. And that made no sense at all when I entered into this concept of light and physics. And then you go, well, we see light. Do we see an external physical world? No, we see a world made of atoms. And that world of atoms is actually within the mind. So I had to go from this external physical reality that had been created through the science that I'd learned at university, really pull that all apart and go, okay, what I'm seeing is within me. The human retina, rods and cones, are actually on the inside, pointing inward. We have inverted retina. We see our dreams at night with our eyes closed, right? So light is being released from the mind. So then I had to figure out...
That is, sorry, I just had to pause you there. That is very powerful. We see dreams with our eyes closed.
Yeah, right? So we have to flip the world, 180, right? Yeah. And then we're empowered. We're empowered to take control of the world that we're creating within ourselves.
Rather than see the bigger picture, we've got to ask who's the artist, right?
Yeah, we're the artist. We're creating this landscape through our actions, through our beliefs, through our understanding. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, hold on a sec. Where am I heading, right? It's like I'm unpicking science down to the existing model that we have, right? So I had to go back to Einstein, back into 1905, and E equals mc squared, right? All is energy.
Everyone knows that one.
Yeah, everybody knows that one. But do you know you can rearrange it?
Oh yeah?
To C squared equals E divided by M.
Wow.
Light. C squared.
180 flip.
180 flip. Rearrange it. E divided by M, electromagnetism, is light. An electric field and a magnetic field at right angles to each other. So all of a sudden, I was able to understand the geometry of light.
Wow.
On a cross. And then the positioning of an electron and an electron. That's what science currently has, right? In atoms, they say there's protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Right.
They don't talk about positrons, right? All of a sudden, it was like, okay, we have a model that uses an electron, and then in the proton we have quarks, and there are 3 quarks, 2 pointed up and 1 pointed down for a proton. 2 pointed down, 1 pointed up for a neutron. Okay, so there's a mirrored symmetry of up and down. All of a sudden I went, okay, the maths we use for the 0 charge on a neutron and the +1 charge on a proton are fractions, and they added together. So if it's pointed up, it's 2/3. If it's pointed down, it's -1/3. And you add them, and you get a +1 for a proton and a 0 for a neutron. And I thought, fractions and adding? There's no consistency in positron-electron pairing, +1, -1, in the model that we're using in biology. So what I did is come up with the idea of, I'm going to change it to make it consistent. So if it's pointed up, you would think, well, up's positive.
Right.
But this is an inverted symmetry. We're looking in, not out. So we make it negative. So up's negative and down's positive. And now we multiply them together. So -1 times +1's -1 times -1 is +1. So I still get a +1 for my proton. And I have an electron that makes those two 0. And now I do the mathematics for my neutron, and I get, well, it's 2 down, 1 up, and so down is positive. So it's +1 times -1 times +1, I get -1. So I've got a -1 neutron, but overall neutrons are 0 charge. So I introduce a positron back into the model for every neutron to get 0. So now I've got a balanced symmetry model in atomics that's non-interactive. It allows it to come back to the state of balance and symmetry, mirrored symmetry. And all of a sudden, my entire universe changed, right? I no longer have a model for biology based on protons, electrons, neutrons.
Yeah.
I have positrons as well in there. And that revolutionized everything for me. All of a sudden, I could introduce information into the scientific model that gave me geometry of inverted symmetry. Allowed me to give the geometry of the human body, right? This part of the brain, that side, that hemisphere controlling this side of the body. There's a crossover within us, the singularity point within. And that's the geometry that I revealed by changing the quark charge calculations in mathematics. So all of a sudden I got cross-based geometry. If you have a cross and you have one here, one here, one here, one here, remember, 2 right angles, you get 2 photons of light. Light has no mass and no charge. All of a sudden I had a geometry within the structure of hydrogen that allowed me to go, it has no mass and no charge. It can quantum tunnel. So it gave me the features of light that enabled the atom to quantum tunnel to create isotopes. Currently, biology is not correct. The models are wrong. You know, you have the DNA, the RNA, the protein, that's the dogma. That got changed when we found an enzyme called reverse transcriptase that takes RNA and turns it back into DNA. And then, you know, obviously messenger RNA can be integrated back into the genome. And they say, well, the vaccine doesn't do that. Bullshit. Biology always finds a way, right? It utilizes all of physics. The funny thing about this process I found using light in Manuka honey and the generation of these hydroxy radicals, it breaks down messenger RNA, it breaks down DNA, it breaks down protein, it breaks down carbohydrate and fats. It just smashes it back into CO2 and water, allowing the body to start again, to reuse those as precursors to grow the new cell. So that's regeneration within our body. So
So you're saying in a way it releases a way for the body to just regenerate.
Yeah, and destroy
naturally.
Destroy toxins, destroy things that have been put into people's body because of an agenda that, you know, the governments are holding. So here I am, a scientist working for the government, caught in this parody between the idea of an external physical reality and a spiritual understanding through my own revelations that I had, and changing these mathematics to keep it consistent. So I was then able to go, okay, in the Bible, right, and talk about He, the Father, God. I don't believe in a male God. I went and used science and went, well, He is helium. If I look at it like that, and a helium quantum fluid, and then the properties of that I can use my science on this new model where I'm reintroducing positrons to connect to the neutrons, then all of a sudden I get 16 electrons per atom of helium. And I could derive dark matter, I could derive dark energy, I could derive the decay of alpha particles as dark energy to give matter, I could derive the speed of light, I can derive the inflationary phase of the universe from a singularity. So everything was there before the beginning, in this new model that I developed from changing the science of quarks. And I was like, oh, what am I digging myself into? It was, you know, when all of a sudden you come up against science and the beliefs that have been introduced to society from a knowledge that's been created through measurement, right? And when you get down to the nitty-gritty of quantum mechanics, they don't know where the location of the electron is or its speed, right? So all of a sudden it's like you have this uncertainty. How do you deal with that? And then I went, okay.
Because it doesn't last long in science, does it?
No. Well, so, you know, quantum mechanics were developed in the 1930s, and still they're struggling with aspects of how does the wave function collapse? Who's the conscious being actually collapsing the wave function? And my kind of model of turning everything 180 and saying it's all within, and it's this light-based system that's using single atoms coordinated to these aromatic rings in our neurotransmitters, and it's receiving hydrogen. And I looked and I thought, okay, here's a really interesting observation. In a neurotransmitter like dopamine, it has an NH3 plus, okay, and it comes from it comes from an amino acid that gets its carboxylic acid group removed to become the neurotransmitter. That functionalizes the amine so that it can receive hydrogen from water, depending on the pH. And then that nitrogen with its 3 hydrogens can deliver hydrogen into the single atom that's housed in these aromatic rings. And that was what was happening with the product that I was making. All of a sudden, the science of these single atoms in Manuka honey started making sense in relation to how the physics of the mind was operating, producing light. And okay, so you have to think about layers, like layers of an onion. And when you peel back one layer, you see further down into the core of the onion. Right? And so the hydrogen adds one layer of energy into the atom. And that's at a layer called the passion light. And for me, I had to reconcile kind of the spiritual information that I was receiving from kind of biblical texts. The Passion of Christ, falling 3 times, hydrogen in the atomic cross of the amine, NH3+, from the passion lines, falling down to quantum tunnel. So I saw a similarity in the language, but also the mechanism, cross-based geometry of light, the way, the truth, right? And it's like, okay, is the functionality of the amine delivering the hydrogen, giving us the isotope, and then that isotope decay giving us higher energy states and spiritual connection? You know, I had a spiritual experience back in 2013 when I was eating Manuka honey, and that was essentially seeing a golden sphere of light in front of me, right? And I thought, well, at the time, it's like having all the taps turned on full. All this information comes, right? So I saw that, and I had 2 other smaller spheres of light on either side. The only way I could reconcile that experience and then a series of images, photographic 3-dimensional images of different times in my life in the future, the only way I could reconcile that was what was a radioactive decay of an atom in my mind that gave me enough energy to push me down, rather than seeing the second layer of light wavelengths that are visible. I got down to the first layer, only briefly, and that experience of the light coming out of that atom gave images that my mind saw, and I had to go and, okay, how the hell did that happen, right?
Good question, you tell me.
I know, it's like, okay, as a scientist, I've got to reconcile between the experience I had, the scientific model I know about. Where do I go to find information to make sense of that, right? And I look to physics, only because all of a sudden the atomic decay of an atom releasing alpha particles gives a negative time dilation. So in a sense, you get to see future events before they happened. And if you think of the benefit that has in providing you with the insight to know what to do and what not to do. So mechanistically, it has a, you would say, a high benefit of being able to draw on how to protect oneself, to see what's coming in the future. And that really made me kind of jump away from science, knowing that the science model that we currently have is incorrect. Walk away, resign from Callaghan Innovation, because they couldn't get what I was saying. And, you know, fair enough. Nobody else experienced what I experienced, right? And it's like, the only way I can really reveal and provide context for it is to develop a scientifically robust model in order to give context for the experience. So that's taken me 9 years.
Wow.
To deconvolute the imagery, but not get lost in that. Come back from that and kind of ground myself in a new science of supersymmetry inversion. Understand the role of light within biology, understand the role of hydrogen as the key element in quantum tunneling, and that's feature of cross-space geometry and putting in those positron electrons as inverted symmetry, right? So if you maintain that 0 point, the world of light, and you know, it's a fascinating time to be alive, because all of a sudden people can educate each other about their own personal journeys and experiences and not be afraid of doing that. It's, you know, I was labelled as bipolar, labelled as schizoaffective disorder. Doesn't matter. The science model for the mind is not complete. They don't understand the isotope formation. They don't understand isotope decay and how that leads to, there's a time, deja vu. Light goes in and light comes out. It doesn't matter if it's going in or out. You'll see it as the same thing. So the mind uses, the conscious mind uses isotope decay to integrate the information into the conscious reality that we're experiencing. So when you break the model and understand how time is actually generated, all of a sudden you can break through the concepts of time, and you can go down to the idea of the singularity, and then come out of that by looking at different scales. So this mirrored symmetry that I kind of found goes all the way down to the Planck scale, 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 of a meter. 1 over the Planck scale gives 6.25 times 10 to the 34 meters. They're the extremes of the universe. That's one half of it. And the mirrored symmetry is identical to that on the other half. So from those kind of concepts, all of a sudden I was able to go and calculate the background energy radiation in the universe, understand how to do those kind of calculations, and then go, the best way for me to utilize that energy is to actually remove myself from the system and allow everything to come back to balance, the balance of opposites. And so I started doing science like that. I started understanding that we have an electromagnetic field around us that we're generating, and the heart's field can be 20 odd meters away from us, 30 meters away from us. It can be felt with squid technology. So
squid technology?
I think it's a electromagnetic detector system that they're using, so you don't have to have contact directly with the mind in order to read information or read brainwave patterns and the energies and frequencies that a person's emitting.
Jeez. And this is a real technology?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
who would have this such technology?
I think they're using it mainly to try to understand brain function.
Right.
Yeah. And different frequencies at which the brain can operate. You know, alpha waves, beta waves, gamma. But when you kind of get to the point of, if I'm interacting with a system, then I'm putting my energy into it, and the system's going to be disturbed by that. So I ended up learning how to push a little bit and then walk away in order to let the system come back to a point of balance and equilibrium again. And then that process utilizes the energy in the universe to come back to a stable state. And hence we do stuff during the day. We become out of balance and tired, go back to sleep at night, come back to stable state. So every day we have this kind of balanced flow of energy going in to these atoms and then coming out at night to stabilize. And that, those processes are so natural that we tend not to even consider them.
Definitely.
And that's the challenge, right? Everybody has an awareness, but when you try to tune into what does light look like, if it is orientating the position of electron and positron pairs so that they are, in a sense, their structure and position is altered by the wavelengths of light so that they're aligned. All of a sudden, everything's kind of tuned to the energy around you. And there's this kind of interplay of flow in and out. And so I learned how to figure out how to put a little bit of energy in, change things slightly, and then let it back to that point of balance. And by doing so, in a way, I'm kind of working with the universe in that ebb and flow. And that allowed me to kind of figure out how to start in different positions to get different outcomes. And then you can go, well, what is the most beneficial outcome for humanity? How can I utilize the science that I've been developing to enable people to, create technologies that help people? So, the science is really in its infancy because all of a sudden I'm using isotope physics and Newtonian physics ideas and single atoms in a non-interactive way to allow the system to come back to balance, and then put that in a bottle and isolate those proteins that are Manuka honey so that people can use a light-based energy healing technology in their own personal healing journey. And it's like, okay, here's a product. How do I get it into market? How do I reveal this new science that is enabling regeneration? And, I tried to do this through work, and the pushback that I got from people who are in charge. And, I think partly I was in a real elevated state because of the experience that I had. But I needed to have that elevated state and experience in order to understand the product.
It wouldn't be otherwise, right?
No.
You wouldn't have been on that journey in the first place.
No, that's the thing. So the journey that you take is to reveal who you are, right? And, all your electrons, all my electrons, all come from the same place at the beginning, and they're all the same age, right? And it's like, when you see it from that perspective, you can understand it from that perspective. Science teaches us a model that's incorrect. It teaches us essentially a physical external world. And it's like, well, that's not the world I live in anymore. It doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't make any sense to me anymore because of the science and because of the experience that I've had. Yeah.
And I think it goes for most of us too, doesn't it? That at least once in your life you've had some sort of experience and you're thinking, that does not make sense.
Yeah.
No matter what background you come from, what you do, there is always something in your life and you're going, never understood why.
Yeah.
And you can't come to the conclusion, and I think it's for that good reason, isn't it?
Well, there is the conscious reality and the time frame that is in the kind of sequential experience of time. And then there's what's happening outside of that spatial reality that we perceive at frequencies of light that are either longer or shorter. The shorter ones are the higher energy ones where all the crazy stuff is happening. So if you don't sleep for a number of days, the more isotope decay is happening during the daytime, and the more weird shit you experience. And it's like, okay, our current model for the mind is wrong, right? We don't allow ourselves to understand the physics of isotopes to generate light and how they're generated through the flow of hydrogen within our bodies.
Do you think, right, being yourself worked for the government for so long and going in deep as you have with science and so many different realms and so many different, just everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And having your experience, do you think that certain things are actually suppressed maybe? Or they just sort of try to show another light towards so everyone goes that way, but really it's something else over here?
Yeah, look, my own personal experience working at the government, having an experience like this and sharing that openly within that environment, it wasn't well received. I was marched out the door, put on gardening leave, told to go and see a psychiatrist. Western medicine holds people in a box, and that box is the mental health box, right? Humanity needs to learn how to integrate those weird and wonderful experiences that we have in our lives back into, a gentle, nurturing way that makes science change from seeing that as illness to seeing that as a more integrative experience of reality in a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum and at a different time. Right? So the images that I received as that atom decayed in a time reversal symmetry. So that's the center of my life at the point of this happening. From 11, all the time that took for that atom to grow, hydrogen being put in, and then as that atom decayed, it reverses, right? So there's an information in a geometry of inverted symmetry at the atomic half-life of an atom. It has a geometry that allows the light to be released. It flips, you would say, a quark, so the weak force, from pointed up to pointed down. But in that same process, the positron becomes the electron, or vice versa. So there's this internal mechanism to stabilize the atom, and I just got to witness it, right? It wasn't something I was expecting. And yet, when you have an experience like that and how to reintegrate back into society, it's not easy. It's not easy because what you want to do is share this information openly. But society doesn't want to listen, or at least the scientific community didn't really want to listen. And maybe I didn't have the tools at the time to deliver it in a way that was receptive. And, it's taken a long time to bring myself down to a grounded state, to be able to share openly, to share in a way that hopefully connects. It has those elements of the odd gem, eyes closed and seeing dreams, so that inverted retina looking inward, understanding the connectivity, understanding how the flow of light happens, like the chi of energy within the body. So my model all of a sudden connected back to yin yang.
I was about to ask you, because that's one of my favorite symbols of my life.
Yeah, right.
Yin,
so the positron-electron pairing.
Because it seems like everything in life has to have an opposite, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't
duality,
work without something. Yes.
But we have that within the body, right? So the symmetry within the body in
Left,
biology.
right?
Yep. Mirrored symmetry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how the universe operates. Balance of opposites.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this dualistic aspect, and it reveals itself in beautiful ways. It really does. When I worked at Callahan, 69 Gracefield Road, the 9 symbol is yin yang, right? And when you start revealing stuff, looking at things, and when you're doing science, you don't leave stones that you don't look under, right? You go down and you look and you explore the relationships, and you kind of reveal things, and you go, okay, what's this telling me? What's this information? And it's like, well, my mum died when I was 11. And then it's like, okay, I'm born on the 18th of the 4th, 1972. 18 times 4 is 72. My mum was 36. Half of 72, double of 18.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, all these numbers started to reveal themselves, because I started looking at them and going, okay, is there something more to this than I'm not actually knowing?
Numerology.
Yeah. And okay, so Newtonian physics, we have gravity and the force being, gravity between two objects divided by r squared, so the radius. So then I figured out, well, if those two are just a positron and an electron, and the distance is c squared, r squared is r squared and c squared. All of a sudden, rather than seeing it as a distance, we can see it as photons of light. And so the model of M, magnetism, equals E divided by c squared. All of a sudden, I can rearrange Einstein's equation again into a Newtonian physics form and understand how magnetism holds things together down at the point of those single atoms. And then how light can be twisted around itself and tied into a knot to be held together in quantum tunneling through these processes of entanglement that's occurring within atoms, which is what reverses in the decay process. So all of a sudden, all the science is being revealed just through, I don't need any instrumentation. I've got my body, I've got an understanding of the geometry and those features within the atoms that creates the physics. And then I looked at that hydroxy radical and how it breaks down everything back into CO2 and water, OH star. And I thought, well, the 3 in 1, right? Hydrogen being Christ, the sun, oxygen, O, the sphere of light to begin with, helium sphere, the Father. And, so I looked to translate. I looked to translate between that biblical information, but put it into a scientific context in order to go, okay, can I justify that? Can I really say that this is the Holy Spirit? This is an energy system that breaks down cells, that restores healing and well-being. And yeah, so far I'm quite happy to say that I think it is the Holy Spirit. So it's a light-based energy system. It does some pretty amazing things. Stops pain within seconds, topical spray. It's given me some pretty weird serendipitous discoveries. And when you break light, when you break open the ring structure which is holding the memories, that's what was responsible for giving me that spiritual revelation and seeing into the golden sphere, getting down to n equals 1 in that layer. And all I can do really is share my story, give people the opportunity, if they want, to try a modality, a natural product that helps with ascension, helps with creating a deeper kind of spiritual connection. Yeah.
And so how long have you had this product for?
I resigned from Callaghan Innovation back in 2019. I started my company, Quantum Technologies, on the 18th of March 2019. I got paid income protection because the scientists and the psychologists and psychiatrists couldn't understand the science I was talking about.
Of course they couldn't.
No. And so I had to walk away. I had to walk away from science that I loved to doing this quantum biology, which I'm passionate about now. And really kind of sharing a different perspective. So I've started, I went to, NZ Earthbeat and went to a couple of festivals.
Yeah.
and got to know a different community. Yeah, one that was spiritually connected and understood kind of what I was saying. So finding your people, right? Finding your people who you can be yourself around is incredibly important. And, you know, discerning when to speak openly and when not to is hard when you're in that elevated state of energy that essentially your tongue's on fire and you can't shut up, right? That's the challenge.
Yeah.
When you're in that state, you're overwhelmed by it, you're taken over by it. And that is the Western society definition of mania, right? So that manic energy, in a sense, gave me the vision, gave me the ability to kind of understand science from that different perspective. So now, you know, now I'm on this kind of entrepreneurial path journey, doing things my own way.
Nice.
Being my own boss, and, you know, fortunate enough to have taken out income protection when I started my PhD back in 1996. Married, 5 children, house, family, all those kind of trappings. You know, I was living that life, and I'm still living that life. I've managed to keep that despite having, you know, I guess, relived a trauma from my childhood through that decay of the atom, but that was my healing, you know. From the external reality, they saw that as a damaged person who was mentally unwell.
Really, what something closes can open something else, right?
Yeah, it does. It really allows reintegration. It allows you to see things from a different perspective. And, you know, I didn't experience any, I guess, as a child, right? I didn't have the opportunity to share my emotional state. And you can't bottle things up forever. Eventually it comes out. So, you know, the revealing of the layers and the complexity of my story, and the science and integration and how I've utilized that knowledge to be able to see things from a different perspective. Yeah, it's a weird one, but it's been a fun journey for me personally. Not so much fun for other people around me. And you know, it's you know, difficult when all of a sudden you go, no, I don't agree with that science model anymore. It's incorrect. We have they call it a baryonic issue, where there's antimatter missing. You know, my new model with the quark calculations corrects that. So, you know, I'm happy with the new model that I put forward, and more at peace with myself because of the experience that I've gone through and the healing and integration that's taken. So, you know, I know a lot of people out there feeling smashed up by the government from the mandates. You know, I've had to walk through a, you know, difficult journey to get from where I was as a government scientist to have an experience to essentially be medicated for 5 years, try to explain to them how the medication's actually working because they don't know the science that goes on in the light with the mind. and kind of, yeah, really just go, walk away. I can't do good things being in that environment anymore.
No.
So, you know, if it doesn't resonate with you, then you're in the wrong place, right? If the doors are shutting, then it's not the right path. So I think it's learning how to read the signs that the universe is pushing you in an appropriate direction or not. Yeah, heart-centered. You've got to let other people have their journeys. Everybody's journey is different.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, it's important to share openly and hold space for each other. So, yeah, no, I appreciate your time.
Oh, definitely. There's a few questions I got. Is that okay? There's a lot.
There's so a lot much to unpack.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, my personal experience was for DMT.
Yep.
So in terms of DMT and how that works, you obviously would have a bit of knowledge about that, or how far can you unravel that for some that, you know, actually I haven't spoken about much on my channel, but this is actually why I've started all this and how my journey started. That's a whole nother story, but yeah, how can that relate to anything you've just mentioned for anything, basically?
Sure. Well, if you
or maybe your personal experience, or that you know of.
Yeah, I've taken a number of hallucinogens in my, I guess, early 20s. I stopped everything back, the last gathering back in 2000.
Oh yeah.
Yep, and I haven't taken drugs since then. Right,
Nice.
so I've experienced more weird shit from not being on anything than being on something. So
Right.
I would say, when you understand you're tripping constantly on neurotransmitters, right? So the functionality of serotonin, of dopamine. If you think of how pharmaceutical industry created serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? So at the moment, everybody thinks it's receptor mediated and neurological function through receptor-based interaction, okay? So if you think, okay, what's actually happening outside of the neuron in these single atom systems that are coordinated to the rings? So that's feeding you the wavelengths of light. That we have fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids in the neurons that have switches in them, and they're light responsive. So they do cis-trans, just like a light switch. Turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. So the membranes are like that. The membranes are essentially a system that's receptive to light. So my model's kind of taken away the idea of a ball and a stick, right, or a lock and a key. And now it uses the functionality of light within atoms. And I have positive and negative electrons, so the positron and the electron. And because they're opposites attract. So they're the bonds in molecules. You don't get two electrons coming together. They're both negative, they'll repel.
Sure.
So by building this different framework, all of a sudden I can look at the geometry of a molecule like psilocybin or dimethyltryptamine, understand the functionality of the amine, right, delivering hydrogen, understand the geometry of the ring. It gives essentially a three-dimensional space. So that ring and the position of the single atom, in a sense, is like the original eye of the mind. And it operates without any need to control it. But it gives you information about what's happening in the future. So you have fight or flight reflexes, and all of a sudden you can respond faster than you're consciously aware, right? So that taps into the light that's happening within those systems, within the subconscious. So this is a subconscious mind physics that people aren't cognitively aware of, but they are when they go into fight-flight. And obviously that's a double-edged sword, right? If you haven't got control, and it's just like you would say you're in the zone, you're in that flow. We used to say on the dance floor in that green room, right? It's that place where everything's happening, you don't have to think. So that's obviously controls heartbeat, controls breathing. So that kind of ability to control all those things that are kind of hidden, all of a sudden you have connection to it. You've gone from an external physical reality to an internal reality of light that you're creating. So then you have to learn, well, what are the ways that this is actually happening? How do I get to control that? Do I get to control that? Some of this, where's my free will in all of that? And I'm still grappling with that kind of stuff as well, but it gives at least a science of light and how light operates, so that we can start to understand if we're in an environment which is calm, you know, we tune to the receptivity of that light that's coming into our bodies, and we sense it because of the high energy short-lived radicals. They're paramagnetic. So when you use the product and you have more of that happening within your body, all of a sudden you're a lot more empathic and sensitive as well, and tuned to that. So in a sense, it might not give you the breakthrough DMT type of experience as, you know, a hallucinogen can. What it does is that it's actually a more natural process that's supporting those natural processes within the body.
Because it's coming from nature itself.
Yeah. And, you know, when you eat food, the food you eat has to go through these types of processes. So your body's extracting electrons, electron transport chain, a proton gradient, ATP generation. Everybody in biochemistry is kind of focused on mitochondria and ATP. You're also producing water. Oxygen's the terminal electron acceptor. The mitochondria absorbs red light to make it function. Why is oxygen bound to hemoglobin in a porphyrin ring of a cross-space geometry red? Well, they're the wavelengths of light sending oxygen to the mitochondria. So we're tuned through channels of light within our body. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so we need to understand that functionality of light, and connection to light's critical for health and well-being. And, you know, that's what's kind of happening in science at the moment. That's the kind of quantum biology and the physics of light happening via photons. How do you get to the operational stuff in the mind? You know, if you think about dementia and Alzheimer's and plaques and tangles, it's like cooking an egg, right? It goes from transparent to opaque. The light gets scattered and it can't get to the right place. So all of a sudden the functionality of light within the mind is being stopped, and that stops mind and memory functionality. So
From liquid to a solid.
yeah. So we need to kind of stop and really take heed of the situation we're in. Yeah. Understand how to arm ourselves with knowledge.
Because knowledge is powerful, but knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, right?
Well, how to use the knowledge in a wise way to enable one another. You know, if you think about how the world's set up and it's kind of engineered society, you know, in a way it is really holds people, but doesn't really empower them to become who they need to be or who they want to be.
Yeah, I like that one. It's very true. Yeah, they become just someone, but it's not really truly who someone can be.
No. So we need to learn, if we enable one another and we support one another, then, you know, we get a better outcome. And I think that's part of the shift that's happening. People are realizing and waking up to the engineered society that we're being pushed toward through that kind of AI technology, that transhumanism concepts and things like that. For me, I don't want to go anywhere near that. I want to connect to nature. I want to be grounded in a science of light, and understand how to utilize light in a positive way for healing and regeneration. So for that, you know, I need to talk to people. I need to open up a language that is quite new, but also very old, right? And people understand the concept of yin-yang, Taoism and Hinduism, the I Ching. When we talk about the physics of atoms, those two languages are poles apart, right? And I think it's really important that East meets West, that North meets South, right? That we find a way of communicating and speak each other's languages, and we learn to translate to make sense of our own experiences.
Yeah, just one more was, well, there's a few more, but fasting. In terms of fasting, I practice a lot of fasting, and fasting releases a whole new realm of things as well, as
Totally.
you know. Yeah, people think it's just, you know, you lose weight or not, but it's really, that's probably the last thing that it really does. It's such a mind, spiritual, mental, physical, emotional state, isn't it? Yeah.
If you think about, for me, memories tied into the light that makes atoms, right? So I have an isotope-based model, and that gives higher energy states. Then there's the radical chemistry, and paramagnetics, and the water body. So when you are using food, then your body will generate energy in one way. When you start to fast, your body will switch into a different mode, and it starts using energy from the materials that you have in your body, and it breaks them down. It does autophagy and processes that release energy as light. So as soon as it breaks a bond, it releases a photon, and so that's a form of energy within the body. So that whole cleansing that you get in a way is so beneficial for health and well-being.
You know, have you seen any dogs?
Sorry, man.
Nah, mate, all good, all good. Yep.
There was some before.
I don't think so.
No, man.
Are you kicking a ball?
No, it's not us, but
Ah,
I'm just kicking it.
Yeah. Spider-Man's come to visit.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Is this yours?
No, no.
You
Do you want it? I think you have the right colours for that one today.
I want someone else's.
Yeah.
Cool.
You'll get hold of their bones.
Nice.
Kids, eh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next generation.
Yep.
Oh, there's the I was going to say there's the...
Yeah.
I'll go first.
So this.
Yeah, it's so memories attached to atoms. I like that because within certain fasts, some are actually quite emotional. I've
Totally,
seen, yeah,
totally.
yeah.
So your emotional body is your water body, and that changes structure depending on the single atom that's bound or housed in the aromatic ring. So all of a sudden, you know, you can have light flowing out of that atom to go into the amine, to go into the water, to create tears, right? So the decay of the atom is such a part of the healing and spiritual experience, the death, decay, regeneration. They're connected, right? They're just one and the same, and they're both kind of, you can't have death without regeneration.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that
Back to the yin yang.
yeah, back
Yeah.
to the yin yang,
Yeah.
back to that central message really of understanding apoptosis, understanding cellular death being critical for regeneration and health. You're not accumulating damage in proteins and structures within cells. You're actually, you get a rubber, a razor, wipe the slate clean, start again. And when you start again,
Why are you putting weed all over me?
it is renewal, right? So your body has a death renewal system built into it, which is just, you know, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Have you tried dry fasting? It's something that I've practiced and I found was very intense, and it's very hard to find.
No, I haven't.
Amount of studies on that, and that's another realm of releasing
sure, like,
atoms. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because what you're doing is you are tuning your body
Toby!
to learn
Hey,
how
buddy.
to. Hey, we're just
making a video, buddy.
Yeah. So if you could be a little bit quieter, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Because in the mitochondria, your body can take oxygen and form water from that proton gradient. That water can then be, the hydrogen from that can go into the atom. So the storage of light within the atom can generate water. So you can fast as long as your body knows how to recover the hydrogen out of that atom, it can restore that water balance within the body. And so that's a pH balance as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you have more protons, then the amine's protonated, it has an extra H on it, and that extra H can then go into the atom. So it's controlling pH balance as well through that atomic system. The tuning in our bodies is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Sure
right?
is.
And when I went, it's using isotopes. It's using physics that's happening at timescales of picoseconds and femtoseconds and nanoseconds. It's doing all this stuff and it knows what to do already. Getting out of the way of it is critical, right? Is using antioxidants, stopping all the radical chemistry, that's the paramagnetic systems within the body. And if we keep taking antioxidants, we have the problem of stopping that regenerative process of cell death and regeneration. So we actually accumulate aging in cells using antioxidants. That's what the model suggests.
Yeah. So from what I've heard, you can't stop the aging process, but rather slow it down.
What you're
doing... What's your view?
What you're doing is saying that actually longevity comes from supporting cell death and regeneration. So you actually, it's more beneficial to use high energy radical chemistry, because what tends to be, if you eat, your body's going to use the food you give it. If you don't eat, your body generates the energy. So you've got to think, well, how does it do that? Where's the energy actually coming from?
That source?
Well, it can be light, right? Because plants, yeah. So when I figured out the product uses blue light, a higher energy, it takes blue light to reduce that single atom to react with hydrogen peroxide, 1200 electron volts from one molecule of sugar versus 100 electron volts going through normal biochemistry of Krebs cycle or glycolysis Krebs cycle electron transport chain generating ATP. So it's 100 times more energy. And then when you get to the physics of single atoms, thousands and millions of times more energy that can be released within. And your body knows how to use it.
So it's like running a circle here in the spot versus running around this whole park.
Yeah. And actually understanding how to connect. Right? All of a sudden, you're using light, and you understand that in a second, your light is at the moon. Right? So the expansiveness of connection changes depending on how much energy you have. And it's just kind of, you start questioning and going, okay, where are the boundaries? And it's learning always. And it's, have I got this right? This seems really weird. And exploring, right? Don't limit yourself by one perspective. Look at multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And then, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And I started looking at things in different ways, and not being afraid to do that. I think kind of giving yourself the freedom to explore and think openly gives you the opportunity to use the tools your body already has within it. Right? Get a better understanding of, well, if I do that, then what are the consequences of my actions? How that going to impact somebody, and really kind of slow down to speed up, to understand how to be positive and constructive, and to learn how to enable people. So with my science and how I approach things now has completely changed as well. I develop technologies, and then I look to work with people in order to not try to compete or create an alternative. I try to share the ideas and the knowledge so that they can see potential for win-win situations where they get to utilize that knowledge as well to facilitate health and well-being. And
another option.
Yeah, it does. It gives people the opportunity to see things from an alternative perspective, and that may be benefit to them or not. And it's, you know, it's up to them. It's not for me to try to convince people that what I'm doing is right or wrong or whatever. It's really about choosing to be open, choosing to be connected.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Beautiful.
and kind of become a witness.
Sure.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's yeah, I mean, we can go on forever. It just expands into so much more. There's everything is part of something, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's very hard to break the loop.
Yeah.
Right? When you think of those cycles of interaction and experience and outcome and then the feedback, and then, you know, I was only able to witness that experience that I had once, which kind of, like a mutant, put me outside of the realms of normality, gave me the chance to see the wood for the trees.
Mm.
And, you know, luckily had a science background to give me some tools to fight against the establishment, to say, no, what you're saying is incorrect, I disagree, I don't want to be another statistic, I don't want to be a person who's medicated.
Yeah.
That's the science now shows that the medication that they're using is harming people, right? So they're not taking into account the physics that's happening. They're not taking into account the radical chemistry that can break down molecules. They're not taking that into account when they give somebody a pill, right? So the science is wrong, the products they're using is wrong, it makes them money, but it doesn't cure people. Right?
Keep them sick. And
yeah, keep them sick and keep them on the pill. And, you know,
in this case, on the jab.
Yeah, in this case on the jab, right? And it's like, well, for me, New Zealand was GE free. The government threw that out the window as soon as they started putting messenger RNA into people. You know,
that was my next question, the RNA, because you say you've obviously studied this, and I think just because they know there's all these people out there that obviously know that it's not good, but someone like yourself that's helped, you know, create and whatnot, I believe that was obviously utilised for the better good, but if, as you say, manipulated and turned to something else, hasn't it, basically?
It has.
Are you good friends with Dr. Malone?
I've been watching Dr. Malone, totally.
Shout out to him if he ever gets to watch us.
And, you know, Dr. Philip McMillan as well.
Mm.
You know, I'm on LinkedIn, and, you know, I've joined up a few groups internationally as well.
Wow.
Doctors Federation for the World.
Beautiful.
And, you know, the science that I'm developing, because it's so different from the standard model, and I've turned away from the external physical to create a light-based model for human biology, it kind of goes up against the allopathic medicine, right? So it is, you know, crazy scientist, mentally ill, and I go, yeah, thanks, that pays me really well, it gives me income protection. The fact that they don't understand consciousness, they don't understand the physics of light within the mind, they don't understand singularity physics. You know, all the physics falls over at the singularity. They don't understand the no mass, no charge, no space, no time.
What do you think they don't choose to understand sometimes, depending
Well,
on certain individuals?
I think that it is incredibly difficult to detach from self, to see those alternative perspectives and then reintegrate that alternative perspective into your life, right? It's very easy to be siloed in science and be brilliant at one thing and focus on that and not have it integrated, not have it in a way that actually makes sense for human, the light being, right? So when you start integrating concepts that make no sense to science, then there's the language barrier. There's, you know, a difficulty that needs to be overcome, because, you know, scientists are put on these pedestals and they do things that have major impacts to society. And when you say, well, they don't know 95% of the universe, they don't identify dark matter and dark energy, they're working with 5% matter, and it's not even matter, it's light, entangled in a quantum process that holds it into these atoms. It's like, well, it's those electromagnetic forces within the atom that's actually critical, creating geometry. And so there's this whole new way of looking at things. How to expand that hologram, the one we see within, to the universe and the scale of the universe. And then how to share that language so that we can learn to play in the garden of light rather than the physical reality. So it becomes a different way of viewing the world, and your responsibility is part of it.
Oh, that's it, responsibility, that's part of it. I think there's a lot of people that tend to forget.
And the more you become responsible for the universe you're creating within yourself, the more empowered you become, and then the more control you have over your life and where you want to take it. So I think that's takes away from the power of centralized control of government. It's enabling knowledge and education. It allows people to look and perceive and see things, and then how to potentially integrate that into their own life and their own journey. So it's an interesting time.
It is.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, but I think it's very good to start on the home front, so to speak. Right.
You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you do, and doing your own healing for me was my first thing that I needed to do. Once I get me right, then those relationships around me can be right. Right, and it's only through relationship that you see yourself as well, reflected in the environment that you're creating. So, challenging, but I think there's still a little bit of time available for people to kind of wake up and re-energize and repower themselves to kind of get strong.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for your time, it's been amazing. And I behave. How'd you come up with the name?
Well, the OH is the hydroxy radical.
Ah, yes, it is. Yes.
So Manuka honey, bee product, and obviously
in the middle. I love that too. Behave. Yeah.
And
funny enough, I used to be a beekeeper. That's the same shape that the bees actually work in.
Yeah, the hexagons.
Right? Out of all shapes, they could have done any shape. Interesting.
I know. And I used to work for the government, right? The beehive. So there's an element of irony in the name.
I'll behave.
Yeah, I'll behave. And essentially that's what they wanted me to do, right?
Yeah.
Behave myself. And I got told what I was doing was wrong. I need to stop it, and Callaghan wasn't going to support me. And I thought, well, if that's where they're at, and that's where they're at, that's cool, that's their choice. I had to go, right? I had to find a way forward that allowed me to integrate this knowledge and science in a way that was going to be positive for me. And healing and regenerative medicine, right? Bees are needed for the planet. We keep killing them with all these bloody pesticides and things. So, learning how to utilize technology that nature has created for us to work with, so in a sustainable way.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool. And obviously you've got a website and...
Yep, obehave.co.nz.
Yeah.
I can give you the links
I'll attach
to the video footage as well. Yeah.
There, you guys see.
Our little booklet
Yeah,
goes with the product. Anyway, this is a gift for you, mate.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome.
Yep.
Try that out myself. Can't wait.
So yeah, just topical spray.
So it's just one, oh yeah, spray on, rub in on your body, arms and legs, as and when needed.
Yeah, so it'll give you extra energy.
Royal jelly proteins.
Yep,
It's
royal
what the,
jelly proteins.
only that the queen bee actually produces.
I know, and she lives so much longer than all the workers.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, the workers only
Yep.
last, I don't know, on average, I've forgotten, like maybe
30 days or something
a
like
month,
that.
around a month, and depending on the species and whatnot, but
And,
yeah, not
and
much
she's
longer
laying
than that.
2,000 eggs a day.
2,000 eggs a day, and yet there she is, she can last up to 4, 5, even 6 years of her.
Yep.
So she's doing something right.
Totally.
Well, that queen bee, maybe not another one in particular.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
brilliant. Anything else? What's your what would be your one message from here in New Zealand to the rest of the nation, or maybe to the rest of the world as well?
I would say slow down. We've got time, be kind, open your heart, and learn to connect in ways that are positive.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Doc.